problema yung tubig. But of course, we have three major areas, the north, south, and central. So ang affected lang during this time was south area. So na-mobilize din po. Nagkaroon kami ng borderless execution. So dinala namin yung mga tao from the north and central para tumulong sa clean up. And this is a very safe operation kasi patay naman ang kuryente. But ang problema lang talaga, we have to clean up, hindi ko na banggit, we have to clean up 36 substations. Hindi ko makita. We experienced 16 momentary interruptions, 29 sustained interruptions. We have to clean up 14,000 poles. Cross-arm, insulator, mga arrester, distribution transformer. So we have to clean up also 900 subtransmission poles. So yan, 4 na substation po yung talagang full clean up. It's Tagaytay, Tagaytay West, Carmel Ray, Silang, excluding yung delivery point na Santa Rosa and Amadeo. Okay, so yung last consideration was that customers cannot do their own cleanup. We were fortunate that we have some subsidiary companies like MServe. So sila po ang nag-a-assist sa aming customers in that cleanup because they also have the same resources as Meralco. Okay, ito yung Ulysses. We were affected by Ulysses around 86%, no? 86% of customers, equivalent to 6.2 million. It affected almost the entire franchise area, region 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, Calabarzon, Mimaropa, CAR, and NCR. But some of these are Meralco's franchise area, no? So ano po ba ang kakaiba dito sa Ulysses? So I think flooding poses a very different risk. Normally, pag nawala ng kuryente, ang customer po nagre-request na ibalik sila, ibalik yung kuryente nila. Pero dito iba. Nagre-request sila patayin yung kuryente dahil they will be exposed to electrical hazards. So ang siguro unique strategy that we can share is that we have close coordination with the LGUs in the RRMOs because they know which areas are flood prone. Okay? And timely energization of these areas are very critical. And we had this continuing program to install remote control line switches. Kasi ang problema, it's too late that we know, hindi na namin mapasok yung lugar. So paano namin papatayin yung lugar kung hindi makapasok yung mga crew? So this is made through remote isolation, through SCADA. Okay? And then, again, protection sa mga lineman, we provide them with doxycycline, which protects them from leptospirosis. Yan. Yung mga line gangs din will not be utilized to repair secondary facilities, but rather our metering security and services teams will take over yung meter-related and secondary-related assets, no? One also strategy that has proven to be effective is the deployment ng mobile stores. Kasi we can accelerate restoration. Imbis na babalik sila sa sector, dinadala na po namin yung gamit. Kasi during those times, ang nangyayari, damage assessment and restoration is done simultaneously. Hindi yung pinakita ni Efren kanina na damage assessment tsaka ka magpapadala ng crew. Dahil gusto namin bumilis yung restoration, sabay na siyang ginagawa. And doon mo lang malalaman kung anong gamit yung kailangan mo. Ito, nabanggit ko na. Okay, so Meralco, sorry. Give me 5 minutes. Meralco is a proud member ng Task Force on Energy Resiliency. And over the last 11 years, we have rendered restoration assistance to several of our brother cooperatives. Ito. Yan. Ito lang. Siguro pakita ko na lang and I'll go straight to the learnings. Bibigyan naman kayo ng copy ng presentation. So, ang siguro unique namin is that part of our contingent, we encourage you to include safety officers. There have been incidents na during the restoration activity, unfamiliar territory, unfamiliar configuration of the facility. Minsan na bibictimize yung restoration personnel. So yung mga safety officers will definitely help in ensuring the safety of our linemen. Okay? So ang isa pa, Meralco kasi United Nations yan. Our linemen come from all over the Philippines. So, pagka meron kaming restoration team, ang pinapadala namin yung mga galing dun sa area. They know the terrain, they know the language, they have contacts dun sa lugar. Okay, tapos ang kasabihan po sa Meralco, nagtatrabaho hanggat may liwanag. Kaya lang hindi nawawala yung liwanag kasi may dalang generator at saka floodlight. So we work 16 hours a day to accelerate the restoration. So ito po, not only core group ang pinapadala namin, meron ding support group that serves a very vital responsibility para sa core group. Nagiging mas efficient yung core group because of this support group. Yan. This is, of course, other best practices. On corporate social responsibility, we are in a highly regulated industry. So, any expenditure incurred by Meralco should not burden the customers, yung hindi related sa franchise area. So we do this assistance, restoration assistance through our corporate social responsibility. So we have one Meralco Foundation that picks up the tab. Okay? So we also, yung contractors po namin, volunteer to be part of the contingency. Hindi rin po sila naniningil. And they do this as their own corporate social responsibility. And pag nagdi-deploy po kami ng mga crews, we take it as an opportunity to bring relief goods, charging station, and lend the use of our gensets para accelerate normalization dun sa affected area. Okay? So ito lang po, some learnings and opportunities. Of course, safety and well-being of personnel should always be a priority. We can't stress this enough dahil head din ako ng safety ng Meralco. And then yung timely and organized communication, coordination is really very critical in facilitating the quick response and restoration. So I think TIFER has been leading our groups and has done a very effective job at it. The prevailing collaboration within the energy family helps address resource limitations and indirectly brings about teamwork and learning and sharing of best practices. So aside from providing CSR, the restoration assistance situations provide also opportunities to identify the gaps in our BCM plans. And we get to practice execution of these BCM strategies in actual crisis situations. And then there is still the huge potential of the collaboration between private and public organizations. And sana tapusin na ni Maggie, the National Energy Contingency Plan will really strengthen the resiliency of the industry group. And lastly, we should continuously learn from past restorations. Region 8 event was siguro extreme. Marami po kaming natutunan doon. Okay. So, collaboration, let me end with this one. Collaboration allows us to know more than we are capable of knowing by ourselves. So, Meralco remains committed to continuously support the energy industry. So, thank you for your attention.
Once again, thank you very much, Meralco, for keeping the lights on. And I'm pretty sure that our friends from the various electric cooperatives who are with us today online will learn a lot from your practice. We are down to our last topic for today's session. Modern technology has greatly helped the energy sector adapt and prepare for disasters and respond to emergencies. A centralized operation center has been widely employed by emergency teams to monitor and respond accordingly to disasters. To share with us the Emergency Operations Center, I would like to invite on stage our speaker from the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation. He is currently the planning supervisor of the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation. His degree in geography, he earned his degree in geography from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and working with the Philippine Geographical Society, ignited his knowledge and experience in disaster risk reduction and management, community organizing, and emergency operations. He leads the PDRF Operations Center here in Clark, Pampanga, and develops programs that create value for DRRM stakeholders while ensuring well-being in the workplace. In line with one of his expertise, he provides technical guidance in developing various simulation exercises to the PDRF network and its partners. He also handles PDRF training courses on EOC and information management, family preparedness, and business continuity for micro, small, and medium enterprises. Earlier this year, he was one of the delegates in the international training program on disaster risk management sponsored by the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency in Stockholm, Sweden. With this network and academic experience, he hopes to contribute to forging stronger collaborations among multi-sectoral DRRM stakeholders in the country. Ladies and gentlemen, here with us live, let's give a big hand to Mr. Erwin Paulo V. Tolentino.
Okay, thank you very much for that kind introduction. No? So, thank you very much for the DOE for inviting PDRF to share our operations center here in Clark. And we believe in PDRF that the private sector has a key role in building the resilience of the country, including the energy sector. So I hope to share with you the importance of coordination, partnership building that PDRF has been doing for years. And yung kaninang picture po, hindi po ako yun. That's our president, Mr. Butch Mailey. So allow me to channel my inner Butch Mailey to present to you the PDRF Operations Center. Okay. Sumobra ulit. One more. Okay, PDRF was an organization established in 2009 as an alliance of business dedicated to build the disaster management capabilities of the private sector. We are focusing on providing the platform for collaboration, for coordination during disaster response and recovery. Through the years, PDRF has grown, more partnerships, more opportunities for collaboration among stakeholders in our country. Okay? Our work has been across the islands of the Philippines, from Luzon to Visayas to Mindanao. That's from preparedness, response, and recovery as well. Now, our organization also works beyond the country, as we are actually part of several networks, global networks, in terms of supporting private sector participation in DRR. More on that a little bit later. Now, what's special about PDRF is that we employ the cluster system. We are familiar with the cluster system of the government, no? But the cluster system of PDRF aims to harness the core competencies of the member companies under each of the clusters. So included there is power, fuel, and energy, which our member company Meralco, si Sir Jun, Sir Efren, leads ng ating power, fuel, and energy cluster. No? So this allows interoperability within the cluster, no? At the cluster level, with the companies sharing similar resources to address the needs. And interoperability also goes across the clusters with PDRF coordinating and matching the resources so that we can deliver the appropriate resources to the affected areas. No? This works not only in response, but for preparedness as well. A fine example is, again, the Power, Fuel, and Energy Cluster and their active participation in the Task Force on Energy Resiliency and the National Energy Contingency Plan. With this system, we are, the PDRF EOC is an asset-light EOC, meaning we don't have a warehouse, we don't have stockpiles, but our resources are with the member companies. They are arranged with pre-agreements so that it's just one call with the safety officers or the coordinating people within the organizations, and we can deploy the resources accordingly. Now, how do we work with the government and other stakeholders? Again, it's with the cluster system. We are interoperable as well with the cluster system of the government. Not all, no, we only have 8 and the government has 11 because we don't have the core expertise, for example, for management of the dead and the missing. We don't have camp coordination and camp management. No? So those clusters we give to the government. But we aim to be interoperable in terms of the critical infrastructures like logistics. That's a good example. No? We are, just this morning, we're included in the cluster meeting for logistics with OCD and World Food Program. No? We are also implementing some preparedness measures or preparedness activities across the clusters, for example, for logistics, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. No? And with this, we are coordinating for reporting mechanisms about the efforts of the private sector in terms of response. So this helps in the planning of the overall response actions of the government and other stakeholders so that the resources are managed effectively, efficiently, and there are no duplication of efforts. Now, how does PDRF do this? We are around 30 people in the organization, and we work with the 4 pillars of DRM in the Philippines. So the units of PDRF is first the Operations Center, which I'm a member of. We have a learning and development unit focusing on capacity building and capacity development and training activities. We have community resilience unit that focuses on the barangay level activities of PDRF. Next, of course, we have the PDRF Emergency Operations Center, which is also the operation center under stress. No? So we are working in response until early recovery because we have to turn over all our data and contacts to our development programs and innovations unit, which handles the recovery. So as you can see, we cover pretty much the 4 pillars of DRM in the Philippines. Now, we have to focus on the Emergency Operations Center. Now, the PDRF EOC is the first private sector-led national operations center in Southeast Asia at least, and it's located just 5 minutes from Quest Hotel. No? So for those of you who are joining the tour later, sana po hindi kayo magsawa sa akin. I will be your host pagdating niyo po sa operations center mamaya. And PDRF uses advanced communication software and technology to monitor climate-related and natural hazards like hydromet hazards, earthquake, volcanic eruptions, and pandemics to provide timely and appropriate information to the network so that they can coordinate their relief and response efforts. Okay? Now, the growth of PDRF can be seen clearly through its story throughout the years. No? We'll see the story of PDRF and how it was formed since 2009. Now, we have set the following goals for the next 5 years. No? This will keep us busy for the next 5 years. So first is to capacitate our member companies to prepare and respond to disasters. So that's number one. We do that through our capacity development programs like ICS and EOC management, and we teach them our information management system as well. Next is that PDRF should be a trusted partner of the government before, during, and after disasters. So we recognize that response is not a race. So it's not who's first, sa baba, no? It's a marathon, and we should complement, as the private sector, we should complement the efforts of the government. And lastly, it's partnerships that produce a center of excellence for knowledge and learning. So these are our partnerships with the academe, with other networks outside the Philippines, to gather the best practices in disaster risk management and share them with the network. Now, with these goals, again, we will be busy for the next 5 years, and we have to set our activities in line with these 3 goals. Now, how do we transform from an operation center to an emergency operation center? So it's not just having a hazard that is potentially damaging to the Philippines. So we have a system, no? First, we have developed triggers on the hazards that we monitor. We monitor hydromet hazards like heavy rainfall, tropical cyclones, we have earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and just recently we are still developing our protocols for the pandemic. Now, those triggers allow us to increase our monitoring capabilities, and this starts our risk assessment process. So our risk assessment is focused on the private sector assets, and MSMEs, no? Our member companies and MSMEs. So we could determine the level of risk and activate accordingly. If it's medium to high risk, it's blue or red alert. If not, if it's low risk, we're going back to being an operation center under white alert. If you could observe, this is similar to the government's alert system, white, blue, and red, but the parameters are independent. So this allows the private sector to move independently without the dependence on the government, but we still keep the reporting mechanisms so that the response will be coordinated. Okay, for everyone's information, for the earthquake this morning, we are at blue alert, so we are on moderate risk right now, but we are still gathering information, and we are prepared to go into red alert once we have more information about the damages in North Luzon. Now, just to, again, for your information, the blue alert is just 12 to 16 hours of monitoring, but for red alert, it's 24/7 monitoring, 2 shifts, 13 hours each of duty, no, sa aming operation center. Now, at the core of our operations is our information management system, which is HANDA. No? HANDA means Hazard and Disaster Analysis for Business Resilience. Medyo malayo yung acronym, wag po natin isipin. No? But it basically has 3 components. First is the ArcGIS Pro, which we use in the operation center to process the data, to map out resources. And we also use Survey 123, which is the data gathering tool of ArcGIS, allows us to gather information on the ground, which directly feeds to our maps under the ArcGIS online platform, which allows us to create applications and create dashboards, create story maps, to provide visualization and data analysis for our network. No? Now, ano yung laman ni HANDA? So HANDA has a hazard monitoring platform, which you can see right now, no? That's a sample, where the member companies has a login credential and they can plot their facilities. Now, what do they do with those facilities? We have provided them with hazard layers. Real-time hazards like tropical cyclones and earthquakes. We have probabilistic maps or hazard layers from UP Resiliency Institute, and we have the government data for our historical hazards, no, like volcanic eruptions. And we update them accordingly. For example, in the case of Taal, we don't for volcanoes we only have since 2019, we only have active volcanoes as points. But since Taal was a big event, we included the hazards for base surge, for pyroclastic flow, for the consumption of the member companies, for their own risk assessment. So with that, if you intersect those facilities that you plotted and your hazard data, you can perform simple risk assessment using this platform, the hazard monitoring application. Okay? Now, I invite you, since we are also looking at our phones constantly, no? I invite you to scan this and join me in the journey of how the PDRF has gone through the years and how we did evolve with the disasters that we are facing now. So, may we switch to the story map of PDRF? Okay, so this is the PDRF story map. This is one of, sorry, nagpa-fog. Ayaw talaga. This is one of the capabilities of our platform is to tell the story of any hazard, any particular operations that we had. So for this, we're gonna tell the story of PDRF. We started with Ondoy. That's the starting point of PDRF, where there was a call for collaboration with the private sector. And by then, we were called the Philippine Disaster Recovery Foundation because there was an emphasis for recovery. Next is that Typhoon Yolanda happened and that response and recovery was not enough. So we opted to change the name and to change the goal of the organization into resilience, thus Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation. No? Now, there were problems with coordination during those two events. That's why our bosses, including Sir Butch Milino, came up with the idea to have a prototype EOC for the private sector. And we set this up by benchmarking across other stakeholders with EOCs, with other countries with EOCs. So we got their best practices and tried to emulate those with our prototype EOC back in Makati. So we had several activations for this, and we practiced our protocols. We built our network. We built our coordination mechanisms with the government and other stakeholders. Unfortunately, before we could launch our formal EOC, Marawi happened. Okay. Marawi was not part of our initial parameters for activation, but we recognized that there is a need for the private sector to help in this hazard or disaster, no? But we are focused there in recovery efforts. And the last activation that we had for Makati EOC was the Mayon eruption back in 2018. And then on April 4, 2018, we inaugurated our Emergency Operations Center in Pampanga. Now, with the inauguration of the EOC and our switch from recovery to resilience, we also have to include capacity development activities with the Operations Center. So that's what I've mentioned, ICS and EOC, so that the private sector and the government can speak the same language during disasters. We also teach them how to use our platform, Handa, and we help them assess their plans using our simulation exercise, facilitation, and design. Now, speaking of Handa, Handa was conceptualized in 2016 and was formally launched in 2019. So that's how long it took for us to design that platform, and we are continuously upgrading the features of Handa to accommodate the requests of the member companies. No? Another program for the Operations Center is GUARD, which is getting airports ready for disasters. We recognize that logistics is another key component of response, and that we should prepare our airports for humanitarian aid locally and internationally. We also have to do this with the ports, so that's coming soon. And then the Operations Center also dabbles with early warning systems. We are in partnership with an Israeli company to provide early warning system for earthquakes. No? That's sometimes unheard of, but this has been proven in Israel, and Japan also has this technology. No? This hopefully gives us around 45 seconds of lead time. Not much. It's not for people to evacuate, but for critical infrastructure to have a shutdown mechanism before even a human can actually shut them down. No? So it can be an automatic switch. Once it detects the waves, the AI can shut down critical infrastructures. Next, we have our partnership with DOE and our involvement in the Task Force on Energy Resiliency. So it started with the memorandum signing with our board members, and just recently I have been, it's an honor to be part of the planning team for the National Energy Contingency Plan tabletop exercise. And we're looking forward for more exercises with the Department of Energy and the TIFER family. Next, some of our response efforts, most recent response efforts. One is with Taal. No? This was, before COVID, this was one of our longest activations. We were activated for 32 days, and we had multiple ground deployments and relief operations in Batangas. But then, the next one was COVID-19, which is still ongoing until today. We had a lot of collaborations and eye-opening partnerships in this. No? For this particular example, this is Project Ugnayan, conceptualized at the first lockdown of COVID. In a matter of a week, in a matter of a short period of time, we were able to raise 1 billion pesos to provide gift certificates to the urban poor in Metro Manila area. At that time, we didn't know that the COVID would hang around for 3 years. So we were addressing the immediate needs of the urban poor in Metro Manila. And the partnership there is with Caritas. PDRF was handling the donations, and Caritas was the soldiers on the ground giving the vouchers to the urban poor. Now, the COVID-19 also tested us as the operation center, as we have to develop protocols for virtual emergency operation center, as we cannot physically go to the operation center, and tested our continuity strategies. And we had to develop some sort of strategy so that we can still activate during COVID. And it was tested later that year for our activations for Raleigh and Ulysses. No? We were part of several RDANA, Rapid Damage Assessment and Needs Analysis in Cagayan and Albay. And we also conducted our own relief operations for the underserved areas, affected areas. No? Fortunately, also, the PDRF and its network was part of the United Nations, OCHA, Humanitarian Needs and Priorities Plan as a separate cluster section. Just 5 minutes now. Thank you. And lastly, I have to talk about, of course, the latest, which was Odette, our response and recovery. No? Can we switch back to the presentation, please? Thank you. Now, the key to our Odette operations was we detected this earlier than most of the advisories that we are receiving from some agencies. No? We saw this as an LPA before it merged into another LPA, and it had potential to become a super typhoon according to the models, European models. No? So we also conducted a briefing for the private sector to discuss our worst case scenario planning and prepare and ask them for their resources. No? What are you prepositioning for this disaster? It's going to hit Siargao, Bohol, Cebu. What are your resources there? And in just a matter of days after the landfall, we already have 2 plans. No? One is to address the immediate needs, which is your consumables, and the other is for intermediate needs. What is after those consumables? No? And by January, we already are transitioning to early recovery and recovery plans. No? Now, some of the interventions that we have is that first, of course, we have to mention the restoration teams by our member companies, Meralco. No, they have deployed their subsidiaries in Cebu, in Bohol, to restore power. No? And then the second picture at the center is that we are trying to move away from delivering consumables to the affected area, which creates dependency on relief goods. No? So we provided them with solar charging stations and water filters that they could use until the next disaster. Unfortunately, there will be next, and we can do better in preparing them. Next, as I've said, logistics was a big part. No? This was a barge provided for us, for the network, and that a lot of our member companies were able to utilize these barges to deliver their relief goods in various areas in Visayas and Mindanao. No? For our recovery, we complemented the government's shelter program by providing what is still needed. Is it wood? Is it nails? Is it roofing materials? So that they can complete their houses. No? The next is with their livelihood. The special thing about that is that we didn't just turn over boats to the affected communities. We turned over the technology on how to build fiberglass boats. They have the mold in their community so that even if the next disaster destroys their boats, they can still make another. No? Again, reducing the dependency on aid. And lastly, we circle back to preparedness by introducing the MSMEs to business continuity and the government with the public service continuity planning. So as you can see, it's from response to early recovery to recovery and again to preparedness. Now, this is my last slide. As mentioned, we are part of several international groups, no? And CBI is part of that. And they are using the blueprint of PDRF in engaging the private sector in other countries so that they can have something of a network like PDRF in their country. No? So we are currently have 13 countries in blue that are trying their best, no? Or helping, CBI is helping them to build their network, and other 25 prospective countries that have potential to have their business networks built up, no, for disaster resilience. So with that, I leave you with 2 QR codes. First is with the Typhoon Odette private sector response. That's a dashboard that you can explore on how the cluster system has worked in complementing the response of the government. And if you want to go back to the story map, this is another QR code for you. And for those of you joining again, the tour later, see you later, and sana po huwag kayong magsawa. With that, maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tolentino, for sharing to us what PDRF is about. And I'm very sure that we're all looking forward to see your EOC. Thank you, private sector, for working hand in hand with the government to achieve energy resiliency. We are once again opening the floor for some questions from our participants. We would like to invite again on stage Mr. Olpindo, Mr. Abuel Jr., and Mr. Tolentino, and to stand by on stage, Ms. Howe. Our moderator for this session is a mechanical engineer by profession who has postgraduate degrees in engineering and business management. He is a sustainable energy management and green energy finance professional who, for the most part of his career, has worked with development-oriented organizations and government-implemented donor-funded projects, as well as the private sector to catalyze and scale up low-carbon and green transition investment. He has worked with the Philippine Department of Energy in the implementation of the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act. Currently, he is the Advanced Energy Sources Systems Lead of the United States Agency for International Development, Energy Secure Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, let us give a big hand to Mr. Noel Verdote.
Hello. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Uh, well, this afternoon we've seen private sector, the best practices and best in industry plans and programs for resiliency, and the need for preparedness need not be overemphasized. And it was highlighted as well that effective collaboration and cooperation between and among stakeholders are in fact necessary in order for us to thrive in this industry. With that, we're now open for questions. This morning we have more questions online, and we would like to encourage questions from the floor. But before doing so, there's one question here. Uh, oh, this has changed again. We have a number of questions from my colleague, Hexel Tulod. This one is for Sea Oils, Ms. Howe. Can you share your experience in getting an environmental compliance certificate? Ms. Howe? The question is, can you share your experience in getting environmental compliance certificate?
Yeah. So for our depots and for our own depots and facilities that are inland, we do secure the environmental compliance certificate. But for specific initially for our experience in Odette, because of the urgent requirements, initially we have not secured the ECC for that specific floating storage facility. So later on, what we are also we would also like to push in this forum later on is that, if there would be certain guidelines to iron out all the documentary requirements, and if that ECC will be required. So that is something that we can address for the future models. But the initial one, when we did deployment for Odette, there was no ECC because the jurisdiction for the marine operations is with the PPA and the PCG.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions from the floor? If there's none, there's another question from Hexel. How can the barge be deployed if there is a signal number 1 in place?
Okay, so there are certain conditions naman po, no, for us to deploy the operations depending on the advices of the PPA and also the PCG. If there is inclement weather, we are advised to shelter. But if minimal lang naman po yung weather disturbances like light rains, actually sometimes we also even stop operations for the safety also of our personnel. So of course, one of our top priority is safety. So if weather conditions do not permit, similar to any barge discharging operations for other customers or our other facilities, we temporarily stop operations until weather is back to good conditions. So for example, in the case of Siargao before, I think a day before Odette made landfall, we were advised to unberth from our berthing area and to shelter our barge in preparation for the typhoon. That is why after that, when it was safe, we were able to go back and redock to the berth after 4 days. So in terms of operations, we only operate on stable weather conditions.
Okay, thank you. If I may, just a follow-up question to both the questions of Hexel. Uh, there's, what do you call this, the IMO 2020. I wonder whether you're covered with this for floating
Yes.
storage.
Yes.
Okay. As regards question number 2, the floating storage is also vulnerable to weather, as was asked by Excel, and piracy, and there's another one, piracy and terrorism. Here in the
Yes.
Philippines, have you experienced those?
Okay. So, thank you. I'll answer the second question first, no, regarding security and piracy. So, those are actually part of our risk assessment. So, if we see that there is a high risk of those items, we take those into consideration. There have been actually other inquiries from other island markets that at the moment we decline to serve because we see that there is a high risk and we're still trying to address those items on how we can operate safely. Of course, aside from the safety of the operations itself, we are also very concerned about the safety of our personnel who will be um, deployed at the moment. So if we deem it too risky because of those types of concerns, we also don't recommend to deploy in that areas. And then for the other item on IMO, so if can you clarify a bit, because my understanding of the implementation of the IMO is that it is actually the fuel used by the vessels
Yes.
during their voyage to reduce to
Sulfur.
lower sulfur
Right.
product. So my understanding is on the Philippine application, it was actually deferred or delayed to 2025. But maybe to also add context, Sea Oil is also acting upon that. We actually started offering VLSFO or very low sulfur fuel oil in anticipation of the IMO 2020 requirements or the full implementation in the Philippines by 2025. So we started our first importation last March, and we are actually in the talks to start transitioning to greener or cleaner fuel products.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions from the floor? Wala pa? We're still busy with the spaghetti. Okay, let's go back to the online questions. From Dennis Gaspang Lego. How do you fast track your damage assessment team report in order to respond faster on restoration? There's no, I think it's still directed to Sea Oil.
All right. So
Or, yeah,
on our
Meralco can also answer this, but yeah, please go ahead.
Sure, maybe I can go ahead. On our part, there are really limitations in terms of, having those available flights to go to the island sites and etc. So that is one of the items where we experienced in Bohol that the response took about 3 weeks because we still needed to do those assessments, and those are the limitations. Unlike where in Siargao, since the site was pre-identified, we were able to deploy much faster. So moving forward, to answer how we will fast track that damage assessment, our call is really, to coordinate with the different LGUs to pre-identify the sites and do the assessments beforehand already.
Okay, thank you. Meralco, please. Efren?
Thank you. For Meralco, our damage assessment crew actually have with them a mobile tablet. So while on the field, diretso na nilang ina-update sa single line diagram sa tablet kung ano yung facility na na-damage. Doon na rin nila ini-indicate ano yung requirement na materyales. So diretso na. And even picture. So diretso na doon sa tablet. Then it is automatically sent to the base. So from the base, makikita na nung repair team leader yung materials, then diretso na, hindi na kailangan actually bumalik nung damage assessment crew sa field para ibigay yung report niya. So that's one way for us to fast track our damage assessment. And of course, our crew, damage assessment crew also given mobile radio. So right there and then, pwede niyang sabihin, boss, madali lang yung trouble dito. Padala ka lang ng ganitong crew, restore natin ito, mabilis lang to. Ito yung gamit. So, quick response crew could then be dispatched, repair the trouble, then restore the circuit. So, with the use of technology, actually, we can hasten the damage assessment and actually repair and restoration.
Maybe PDRF can also respond.
Well, as PDRF, as the EOC, no, we really don't have the mandate to perform damage assessments, but we are invited by the government or by the UN to perform, to join their risk assessment. No? What PDRF can provide, aside from fast-tracking damage assessment, is to provide the perspective of the private sector. What is the most vulnerable part of the private sector? It's the MSMEs. So in the initial reports of our data from the government, MSMEs or micro, small, and medium enterprises are not included in the assessment. So with the participation of PDRF, we are able to provide inputs in the Ardena report so that the interventions of the government and other stakeholders participating in the Ardena can lean into what the MSME needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, questions from the floor? Going once? Come on. Twice? Wala pa rin. Okay, let's go back to the online question. This is question for Mr. Abuelo Meralco from Excel. What is Meralco doing in relation to Republic Act 11361 or the Anti-Obstruction of Power Lines Act?
I think Efren knows this, the reply to this one.
Well, with respect to the AOPL, Meralco actually work together with DOE and the LGUs with regards to the implementing rules and guidelines, Meralco being one of the most affected with this affected in a way that the AOPL maganda actually good for us because one of our common problem, especially during typhoons, are fallen trees, fallen debris. Our distribution poles and lights actually can designed to withstand up to 270 kph or Cat 5. The problem is the poles got toppled because of a nearby fallen tree or foreign object, a nearby part of a building or scaffoldings getting down fell on our line, pulling the pole together. So with the AOPL, we see this as a very good way of having our electric distribution system more resilient kasi mababawasan yung obstructions on our pagtatayo ng linya and even on our maintenance activities like trimming every now and then kasi there is already a law that protects, kumbaga magkakaroon ng parang corridor for our distribution lines.
Can I add?
Please.
Naalala ko lang yung initiatives ni Meralco related to this new law. What we did is yung awareness muna. being a new law, so Meralco initiated awareness program sa mga involved organization, particularly yung LGU. Why the LGU? I think this was done in collaboration with the DOE, the PRC, Board of Electrical Engineering. So ang ginawa namin, we conducted a seminar for the details o yung mga salient points nitong bagong batas. Kasi itong AOPL, this is a new requirement for securing a building permit. So parang when you apply for a building permit, dadaan ka sa utility kung yung building mo is not within the power line corridor. That ensures the resiliency nung electrical facilities. So Meralco is setting up this process na through our business centers. So parang magiging regulatory requirement na siya when you are constructing a house. So bago ka releasean ng building permit ng OBO, you have to go to Meralco to secure certification that yung design ng bahay mo is not within and complies with the clearance requirements ng power line corridor. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir. Wala pa rin question? May question na ba sa floor?
Ako po,
Yes, sir.
I would like to ask a question.
Okay.
I would like to address po this to Mr. Olpindo regarding the particularly the circuit recloser. So I just want to understand po, sir, if number one, is this only a Meralco implemented practice? Because I was also thinking po about the electric cooperatives who also have frequent outages. Assuming po it's not typhoon, outside of that, number one, is it only a Meralco practice? And number two, naisip ko lang din po, if we space it closely, is it cost ineffective? Just thinking of the longer, yung kunwari po, the bigger picture of yung long lines, if we, let's say, space it closely, the circuitry closer, para po mas mapaiksi natin, kunwari yung segment na, kunwari may nag-trip, maliit lang yung section na mawawala ng kuryente, the rest meron ulit. Will it be cost ineffective?
Okay, sige. I'll answer the first question first, kung Meralco lang ba. Now, the reclosing scheme is actually all utilities worldwide implements a reclosing scheme. Actually, sa ibang utilities abroad, mas mabilis pa, minsan 1 second lang or 2 seconds, minsan 1 second, 1 second. So different, each utility is unique in terms of implementation of its closing scheme. And for us, the 5 seconds, actually we originally came from 2 minutes to 3 minutes before, then binago namin ng 2 seconds, 15 seconds, and now our standard now is 5 seconds, 15 seconds. Because as time changes, nagbabago na rin yung mga equipment, nakaka-ride on na yung mga industrial equipment, motors, to the different reclosing scheme because of the technology. So, kumbaga, we also implement new reclosing scheme depending on sa technology. So, and the answer is no, it's not just Meralco, it's implemented worldwide. I just don't know with the electric cooperatives if they do have reclosing scheme also, automatic reclosing scheme. Doon sa next question mo, yung let's say for a long line, ilan ba dapat yung automatic circuit recloser para syempre kung ang fault mo is sa dulo, eto lang dapat yung maapektuhan. Yes, we do have that kind of study. And longer lines, of course, have more automatic circuit reclosers along the line para let's say kung ang fault mo is nasa dulo, hindi mo maapektuhan yung buong circuit hanggang doon sa substation. You just have that segment of the line being isolated and the rest of the line may kuryente. So we do have that always a study. Alin ba yung the best na sectionalizing scheme, most effective, and most economical? Of course, economy always play a major part in every capitalized expenses.
Thank you. Questions from the floor? Yes, sir. Please, uh, please identify yourself and your affiliation. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. I am John with DOE. Um, my question is for Sir Antonio Abuel. Nakinig ko ako dun sa presentation nyo kanina, dun sa regarding sa Taal eruption. Medyo nahirapan yung Meralco maglinis ng mga transmission lines. Ito po yung tanong ko. In 2018, Davao Light and Power Company began construction of underground distribution system or UDS. Do you consider this as part of the strengthening the resiliency of our distributions network?
Doon sa tanong, if we consider an underground configuration.
Yes, sir.
Yes. But selective. So selective kami in applying the underground standard because ang cost ng underground is 6 times yung overhead cost. And the mandate ng ERC dun sa franchise law is to provide energy service at the least cost. So we use the most economical standard, which is yung overhead. So, but now, to facilitate reliability, there's another cheaper option. So yung insulated cable, pero overhead pa rin siya, yung 3-wire. So I think this is a more reliable option, but mahal lang ng konti dun sa bare conductor. So it's a better option than fully underground. But doon sa selective, when I say selective, kasi ang problema sa Pilipinas kasi flood prone. So kaya nadi-discourage din kami na na mag-underground. Alam naman niyo yung water and electricity don't mix. So yung mga termination yan, when subjected to flood, we're supposed to expect yung waterproofing niyan eh. Pero hindi rin siya. These facilities degrade over time. So nagiging weakness din niya yon. So selective kami in industrial parks, yung mga pero to manage cost, ang ginagawang arrangement ni Meralco, nagsishare yung yung ecozone or yung exclusive subdivision that they shoulder the cost ng civil. Kasi isang malaking component ng underground system yung civil works. So ang nagiging sharing, yung malaking part ng civil work shouldered ng end user, and Meralco covers the cost nung incremental naman between a bare wire and insulated wire.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, perhaps for developments like BGC, the new ones, Meralco can consider underground. Yeah. Okay. Wala pang dagdag question from the floor. We have another one here for PDRF from Hexel. How does PDRF fund its operations?
Medyo sensitive topic. Pero thank you for that question. No? Hindi naman ganun ka-sensitive. But to be transparent, we are a network of member companies that entails membership costs from the member companies. But we are also targeting funding from funding agencies like USAID. We have projects with them, especially with our other units like learning and development, development programs and innovations, and community resilience. So those fund our operations. In terms of relief operations, again, we are an asset-light emergency operation center, and the resources of the EOC lies with the member companies. But in times of major disasters like that of Odette, we can release a call for donations to the network, to the public, for them to fund our operations, and we make sure that those donations are managed well, and that we serve those underserved communities that have been identified through collaboration and coordination with the government and the private sector.
Okay, thank you. Wala pa rin? Dagdag na question? Naalala ko lang yung sa Meralco, ano yung anti-obstruction. Hindi to question, but recently in our subdivision, nag-tree cutting sila. Tree trimming to maintain certain height so that the Meralco distribution lines won't be affected. Kasi during summer, nag-spark na siya. But one resident complained to DNR, and DNR stopped. So, I don't know, better collaboration. And there's another one. I'm sure you've seen this in Metro Manila especially. Yung LGU nag-expand yung DPWH, tapos naiwan yung poste ng Meralco sa gitna. So, Meralco is now the obstruction. Ginawang parking tuloy yung kalsada. Just a feedback. I was reminded before going to the next question. Ma'am, nawala. My question
Siguro, sir, to add to your inputs. Yung AOPL addresses yung refusal ng owners to have the trees trimmed. Kasi yun nga, in cases na yung mga nara, yung mga ayaw nilang pinapaputol yon, but the AOPL gives authority to the utility to trim these trees that disrupt electric service. Parang balancing act lang eh. Yung result kasi ng interruption causes other problems to the economy, dun sa mga customers, over yung environmental concerns naman.
Right. Okay. Thank you, sir.
With regards naman, sir, dun sa mga, yung originally kasi, yung kalsada mo, one way going north, one way going south, then eventually, then may poste ka magkabilaan ng Meralco, actually distribution utility. Then nag-road widening na iwan sa gitna. So, Meralco is actually addressing that situation. So, talagang fina-fast track namin yung pag-relocate ng pole. Common issue lang now is pag nirelocate ko siya, the right of way, saan ko siya itatayo? Kasi either kanal na or private lot na yung susunod, or minsan ayaw namang din ng LGU na tayuan namin ng poste, yung gutter. So there lies the question now, saan ko ngayon ilalagay yung poste na yan? So although we're doing really our best to relocate them kasi nga may mga instances na nababangga siya, then nagkakos ng power interruption, just like my example kanina. Ang common issues lang talaga is the right of way. So, again, collaboration, working with LGU, DPWH, malaking tulong talaga. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Okay, talking about LGUs. This is a question from Larry Bayrante of NGAP to Ms. Howe regarding the installation of storage barging facility. You mentioned some support from LGU and other groups. Are there other needed critical support from the LGUs and other government institutions in your wish list that can facilitate the process?
Yeah. So, in terms of critical support items, specific for the LGU, it would really be that nomination of those sites. So, yung isang experience, for example, namin in Bohol, no, medyo matagal kaming nakapaghanap ng site eh. And even during the deployment already, there were still some challenges because the port sa Marabuhok was actually a PPA port, and it's intended also for other use. So, syempre, for example, in relief operations, hindi lang naman fuel eh. Sometimes there is also, food or other supplies that are, or even minsan passengers din that are going through the port. So, syempre, fuel, iba yung requirements niya. So, kumbaga yung proper planning of those areas na this port can be designated for fuel, will it clash with possible relief operations for the food, water, or temporary items for ROROs? Yun yung direct items for the LGU. But also for the other governing bodies, it would really be if we can develop that framework and governance or guidelines for the implementation. Kasi ang experience namin for the different island markets, sometimes iba-iba din ang view ng local chapters. So if we want to implement this nationwide and scale this type of model for relief operations, dapat isa lang yung form ng guidelines, and it can be something that will be followed by the different agencies. So on the part siguro of the national agencies na, maybe we can talk about and develop those guidelines para when we implement, it would be easier.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here from the floor. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. My name is Don Casio from GSIS. My question is directed to Meralco. Do you secure insurance for your transmission lines and distribution assets? And if yes, are these assets insured locally or in the international market? Thank you.
Yes, we do insure our entire transmission and distribution facilities. And since the amount is quite huge, so it's both, parang ang insurance niya is partly international and partly local. And we do insure our assets.
Okay. Any other question from the floor? Okay. Yung isang question here is similar to what Meralco already explained regarding the cost between overhead and underground. We have one last from Jeffrey Neil Karangian. I think this is directed to Meralco. Comments on IPIRA law and sustainable energy.
Very sensitive question. Siguro, we just strictly follow. That's the short answer. Whatever the law requires, Meralco strictly follows.
Okay. So this is one of the 19 agenda of the present administration. Yeah. Also on sustainable energy. And I think it's related to energy efficiency and conservation as well. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Siguro to answer that point, our new president, Attorney Ray Espinosa, since taking over the leadership of Meralco, implemented a lot of sustainability initiatives pertaining environment and climate change. So our energy portfolio has a plan to slowly utilize renewable energy. But it's a long term, of course, because of the economical consideration. But there's a plan in place to for us it is a faster shift to renewable energy than siguro most utility will adapt.
Okay, thank you, sir. Meron pa pala. I think sunod-sunod to sa Meralco. Tatlong tanong. Unang tanong from Kirelco, Rico. One of the agenda of President BBM is the proposed amendment to IPIRA law. On your end, what do you think is the particular provision that should be amended?
The question is a little bit generalized, and we're both engineers. So it seems like that would be a hard question to answer.
Siguro legal ang sasagot niyan eh. Anyway, but I think the current legislation or regulatory requirements are, well, we have adapted na eh. Kasi ang tagal na nitong EPIRA eh.
Yeah.
And I think there might be parang incremental improvements, but in general, I think it addresses both consumer and utility concerns. So balance naman. But of course, there will always be improvements, di ba? Wala namang perfect rule or system. Okay.
So, yeah. There's another question here from Akelco, from Dexter Tabia. I think installing reclosers would be great for the DUs. However, the problem is if you apply it for CapEx to ERC, what will be the justification or justifications? For Meralco, what are your justifications? Reliability, customer satisfaction? Thank you.
This addresses actually reliability because one of the key performance indicator of a utility as mandated by ERC is to improve its reliability performance. Every DUs, private and electric cooperatives are mandated to maintain a reliable and safe performance of its circuit. And based on the performance-based regulation of ERC, a DU performing good quality of service to customers in terms of interruption, times, and duration will be rewarded if it meets the standard being set by ERC. And if the performance of a DU worsens with respect to number of interruptions and interruption time, a DU is likewise penalized. So installing circuit reclosers actually addresses the reliability because just like my example earlier, putting a good number or equitable number of reclosers along the line instead of tripping the entire circuit, and let's say that's 10,000 customers or 9,000 customers for the whole circuit, and you installed 3 subdivided into 3,000 each, a fault on the middle of the line will just affect the 6,000 and save the 3,000. A fault on the end of the line will just affect 3,000 and save the 6,000. So their reliability in terms of service performance can be actually really be seen through the installation of different automatic circuit reclosers.
Thank you. Right, sir. And also the business continuity, especially if
Yes.
it's a commercial district or area. Now, one last interesting question. Kung wala na sa floor, I'd like both Meralco, including Sea Oil perhaps, brief answer to close this session. Is the proposed opening of the Bataan nuclear power plant considered a resilient way to mitigate the effect of high electricity and fuel costs? This is from Rico of Querelco. Sir from PDRF?
I think mauna muna.
Siguro the short answer to that is yung nuclear technology has progressed a lot. So I think we expect safety, a lot safer equipment or design these days. And from what I hear, hindi na big scale yata yung nuclear ngayon. There can be small scale capacities that is more siguro feasible. Meralco stand, I think, is to support this direction.
Sea Oil?
Yeah, siguro on our side, no, it is an alternative source of energy. Yes, I think I share the same sentiment with the gentleman from Meralco. There, throughout the time gap where it was first constructed and to present times, marami na din kasing differences and advancements in the technologies. So there should still be an assessment if those technologies are, still applicable or up to date, or meron pa bang mga better way to operate those. Fossil fuels kasi, syempre, that's a very precious resource, and we see that later on, it will start dwindling down Even for the automobiles, diba, we're actually starting to transition already to electronic vehicles. So alternate energy sources are welcome, but given that kind of time gap, there still needs to be that assessment because malaki na din yung naging advancements and changes over the past couple of years.
Well, for PDRF, we don't really stick our hands into those types of topics, but what we can do as an NGO is that we can complement the government's effort in clarifying some of the yung mga questions about the hazards that could affect the nuclear power plant by engaging the community and preparing them what are the changes that could come if this operates, anong effect sa LGU, anong effect sa household level. We could customize some of training activities and simulation exercises for the community to help them prepare the transition from non-operational ng nuclear power plant to its operation. Thank you.
Thank you. Kung wala na pong tanong sa floor, I'd like to close this session. And thank you very much, gentlemen and lady, for
Thank you very much, sir.
this session. And just one last thing for us to think about. Sino kayang LGU ang gustong maglagay ng nuclear power plant? Just for us to think about as we go to the plant, to the PDRF Operation Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burgote. And we request our resource speakers to stay on stage as we award the Certificate of Appreciation. And we would also like to invite the Assistant Director of the Department of Energy, Oil Industry Management Bureau, Assistant Director Romero, to be on the stage to award the certificate. This certificate of appreciation is presented to Ms. Nadine Riba Howe. This certificate of appreciation is presented to Mr. Efren D. Olpindo. This certificate of appreciation is presented to Mr. Antonio M. Abuel Jr. This certificate of appreciation is hereby presented to President Rene S. Mayley to be accepted by Mr. Tolentino. Thank you very much, private sector, for sharing your expertise in the energy sector. That concludes session 2 and day 1 of our Energy Resiliency Forum. But wait, we have more in store this afternoon. We would love to know your thoughts about our forum for today. We encourage all our participants to answer our post-evaluation form. You can do that by scanning the QR code shown in the screen. And I'll give you a minute to do that. We would also like to thank the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation for allowing us to have a on-site tour on their EOC. And with that, we would like to remind the registered participants to go down in the lobby just below this function hall as we meet for our PDRF EOC tour. And let us also continually be mindful of our social distance. And with that, comes the end of day 1. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again tomorrow.